This video will walk you through the process of replacing every part of the Dutton-Lainson DLB 1000 ASL brake winch. Once you have disconnected your load from the cable and wound it completely off of the winch's reel, use a 7/16 inch wrench to remove the nut holding the cable clamp in place. Pull off the nut, clamp, and bolt, then slip the cable out of the slot in the side of the reel. Next, use a 15/16 inch wrench to loosen both handle nuts, then remove them and the handles from the two drive shafts. Use a large flathead screwdriver or a 3/8 inch wrench to remove the reel cover's two screws, then take it off of the reel. Use that same screwdriver or wrench to remove the gear cover's thread-forming screw. Then use two 7/16 inch wrenches to loosen but not remove the nut on the winch's base spacer bolt. Lift the gear cover out from behind the end of this spacer bolt, then slide it off of the primary drive shaft. Next, use two 9/16 inch wrenches to loosen the bolt holding the reel in place. Pull it out from inside the reel, leaving the reel bolt lock on the bolt. Then pull the reel out from inside the base, leaving the spacer inside the reel. Loosen the nut on the higher ratchet pawl with your 9/16 inch wrenches, then remove it from the bolt. Pry the ratchet spring out of its small hole in the winch's base, then pull off the rest of the ratchet parts. Use your 15/16 inch wrench to loosen and remove the hex lock nut off the end of the lower intermediate drive shaft. To prevent it from spinning as you loosen the nut, slide one of the winch's handles back on the end of the higher primary drive shaft and hold onto it, or use a screwdriver to jam the gears. Carefully pry the E-ring off of the intermediate drive shaft with your flathead screwdriver. If your winch was made after May 2016, there will also be an E-ring on the primary drive shaft. Remove that one too if it's there. Use your 7/16 inch wrenches to remove the two nuts from the detent block's bolts. But leave the bolts in the block so the springs and detent balls that are inside the block stay inside the block. Slide the primary drive shaft and detent block as far to the other side of the base as possible, so you have enough room to then move the intermediate drive shaft towards the other side of the base. Remove the spacer, double D washer, brake pad, ratchet wheel, and second brake pad from the end of the intermediate drive shaft. The brake hub assembly can then be unthreaded and removed, and the shaft can be pulled out of the base. Next, use your 9/16 inch wrenches to remove the second ratchet pawl nut, along with the washer, pawl, spring, spacer, and bolt. To make it easier to get to the primary drive shaft, you should now remove the base bolt and spacer with two 7/16 inch wrenches. Slip the spacers off the detent block's two bolts. Unthread the bolts from the block until you can pull them out. Then carefully collect the block springs and detent balls as they fall out of both holes of the block. You can then slide the primary drive shaft out of both the detent block and the base. To remove the winch's bearings, start with the largest one, which should only need a small tap from a hammer to free it from its hole. To remove the two small bearings with their rounded sides facing out, turn the winch on its side, set the rounded end of a 5/8 or 11/16 inch wrench on the bearing's rounded edge, then hit it with a hammer to loosen them from the winch's base. For the small bearing with its rounded side facing inside the winch, put a punch through the drive shaft hole in the opposite side of the base, then hit that with the hammer to knock the bearing loose. Reassembling the winch is a matter of completing all of these steps in reverse order. Pound the bearings back into the base's holes without leaving any gap between the bearings and the base. And make sure you reinstall them so they face the same direction they were before you pounded them out. For the largest bearing, line up its notch with the notch on its base, then pound it firmly back in place. To install two new ratchet pawls, set the washers and pawls on the bolts so their flat sides are facing down, and put the spacer on the bolts. Hook the square ends of the springs through the small holes in the base, then insert the bolts, washers, pawls, and spacers through both the large holes in the base and the springs. After tightening the ratchet pawls nuts, ensure that the spring coils are not caught under the edge of the ratchet spacers and that the ratchet pawls will fit nicely into the hook of the springs. Next, slide the intermediate drive shaft partly through the base of the winch. Put a little grease on the brake hub's threads. Thread the brake hub all the way to the shoulder, then back it off a half revolution, resulting in a 0.062 inch gap between the shoulder and the brake hub. Install the new brake pad on the intermediate drive shaft, then the ratchet wheel, followed by another brake pad, then the washer and spacer. Make sure that the round side of the ratchet wheel is facing out and that its flat side is facing in. If you have a newer DLB 1000 ASL, the ratchet wheel might have a small X stamped into its round side to help you install it correctly. Hold both ratchet pawls against the hooks of the ratchet springs, then slide the intermediate drive shaft completely through the winch. Let go of the ratchet pawls, then verify that both pawls are correctly aligned with the ratchet wheel. Set the E-ring in its groove on the other end of the intermediate drive shaft, then press it all the way down with your flathead screwdriver. Insert the primary drive shaft through the winch, then slide the detent block onto the end of the shaft, so the larger gap between the holes on the top and bottom of the block and the edge of the block are on the same side of the winch as the ratchet pawls and ratchet wheel. Insert a detent ball into one of the top holes, then put a spring on top of it. Push the spring down with a small flathead screwdriver, then pull it out just as you slip the block's bolt over the spring. Thread the bolt the rest of the way through the hole. Repeat this process on the other side of the block. Then place a gold spacer on the end of each bolt. Push the block against the side of the winch so its two bolts go through their holes, then reinstall both nuts on the bolts. If your winch had an E-ring on this drive shaft, reinstall it now. Hold the spacer between its two holes in the base, then slide the spacer bolt through it. Set the nut on the end of the bolt, but only slightly tighten it so you can slip the gear cover behind it later. Once again, use a handle or screwdriver to keep the intermediate drive shaft steady as you retighten the large nut on the end of the intermediate drive shaft. Next, take the spacer out of the reel, put some grease inside of the reel, then put the spacer back in the reel. Hold the reel between its two holes in the base, then slide the reel bolt through it. Make sure the reel bolt lock is flush with the side of the winch's base, then firmly tighten the nut on the other side of the bolt. Place the reel cover over the reel, then tighten both of its thread-forming screws with your large flathead screwdriver. Slide the gear cover's hole over the primary drive shaft and set the base spacer bolt into the groove on the other side of the cover. Reinstall the cover's thread-forming screw and finish tightening the base spacer bolt's nut. Finally, slide the handles back onto the drive shafts so they are facing the opposite direction from one another. Then retighten each of the handle nuts. If you need help with setting up or reinstalling the cable onto the winch, click here to watch that video. Thanks for watching. More videos like this can be found on our YouTube channel. While you're there, tell us what other topics or products you want to see us cover in an upcoming video.